For 300 years my job was to measure how much a species could destroy, and I was the best in the galaxy at it. And then a human officer stood on my testing range and shattered every record I had ever kept. And not one of the records she shattered was a record of destruction. And it took me the rest of my life to understand that she had not broken my rankings. She had broken the thing the rankings were for. My name is Oren Tesredi. I was, for most of my long life, the senior assessor of the Galactic Accord's Office of Comparative Armament, the official whose duty it was to evaluate the military capacity of the galaxy's peoples, to test their weapons, to score their firepower, and to assign each species its place in the great ranking that determined so much of how the galaxy treated it. It was respected work. It was, I believed, important work. And I am going to tell you about the day a human shattered my records, because the official report of that day is accurate and says nothing true, and I am the only one left who was on the range and understood, eventually, what actually happened. Let me explain the ranking, because you cannot understand what the human did without understanding the thing she did it to. The Galactic Accord was a community of some 60,000 worlds, and like all large communities it ran, beneath its diplomacy and its trade, on a quiet understanding of who could hurt whom. This is not cynicism. It is simply true, and the Accord had the wisdom to make it explicit rather than pretend otherwise. Every member species was assessed periodically for its military capacity, its firepower, its destructive reach, its capacity to wage and survive war, and assigned a place in the ranking, and the ranking shaped everything. A high-ranked species was courted, deferred to, given weight in the councils. A low-ranked species was, not mistreated exactly, but discounted, its concerns weighted less, its voice quieter, because the galaxy, for all its civilization, listened most closely to those who could hurt it most. My office maintained the ranking. I had spent 300 years measuring the destructive capacity of peoples and sorting them into their places, and I was proud of my precision, proud of my objectivity, proud that I had reduced the chaotic question of who can hurt whom to a clean, fair, rigorous science. I want to tell you about one assessment from early in my career, because it taught me what the ranking did, and I learned the lesson exactly backwards, and it took the human to teach me I had learned it backwards. There was a people called the Seminin, gentle, scholarly, a people of music and long thought, who had the misfortune to occupy a system rich in something a more powerful neighbor wanted. The Seminin came to my range to be assessed, hoping, I think, that a respectable ranking might protect them, might make their stronger neighbor think twice. And I assessed them honestly, as I assessed everyone, and the honest truth was that the Seminin could barely destroy anything at all. They had almost no firepower. They had never built their civilization around destruction. They had built it around music and thought, and so, on my range, faced with the targets, they performed pitifully, and I ranked them near the very bottom, accurately, objectively, with my famous precision. And their neighbor read the ranking, and understood from it that the Seminin could not hurt them, and within a generation the Seminin were a conquered people, their music silenced, their worlds taken, and the galaxy did not intervene, because the ranking had said what the Seminin were worth, which was very little because they could destroy very little. I told myself at the time that this was not my doing. I had only measured. I had only reported the truth. If the Seminin could not defend themselves, that was a fact about the Seminin, not about my ranking. And I believed that for nearly 300 years, that the ranking merely described a reality it did not create. It was the human who made me see what I had refused to see about the Seminin. That the ranking did not merely describe who could hurt whom. It taught the galaxy that the capacity to hurt was the only thing worth respecting. And so it had built a galaxy in which a gentle people of music and thought were worth less than a brutal people of weapons, in which the Seminin's inability to destroy was read as an inability to matter, and that I, with my precise, honest, objective rankings, had spent 300 years handing the galaxy's stronger peoples a tool that told them exactly which of their gentler neighbors could be devoured without cost. I had not merely measured the reality. I had reinforced it. Every ranking I produced taught the galaxy, one more time, that destruction was the measure of worth, and the galaxy had learned the lesson, and the Seminin had paid for the lesson, and I had filed it under objectivity and slept well. The human would not let me sleep well again, and I have been grateful for the insomnia. The test was always the same, because fairness required it to be the same. We called it the demonstration. A species-seeking assessment, usually a newly admitted one or one petitioning for reassessment to a higher rank, would send its finest to my testing range, a constructed world in an empty system, built for exactly this purpose, and there they would be given a series of standardized targets and asked to destroy them, and we would measure the scale of destruction, the speed, the efficiency, the reach, the sheer quantity of force a species could bring to bear, and how well it could aim it. The targets grew progressively larger and harder: derelict ships, then constructed fortifications, then artificial mountains, then at the highest tiers, whole constructed cities, empty of course, built to be destroyed, so that we could measure how thoroughly and how fast a species could unmake a city, because the capacity to unmake a city is, in the end, the capacity that the galaxy's quiet understanding of who can hurt whom actually rests on. The records I kept were records of destruction. Largest area scoured, fastest fortification reduced, most complete city unmade. These were the numbers that determined a species' place in the galaxy, and I kept them with devotion, and I had kept them for 300 years, and I had never once questioned what they measured, because measuring it was my whole life. Humanity came to my range in the 2nd century of their membership, petitioning for reassessment. They had been admitted at a low rank, new species always were, and they had functioned at that low rank for 100 years, and now they petitioned to be assessed properly, to demonstrate their firepower and take their true place in the ranking. This was routine. I prepared for it as routine. I had assessed perhaps 400 species in my career, and I expected humanity to be one more, a middling military people. I assumed from the preliminary data, capable of respectable but unremarkable destruction, likely to be ranked somewhere in the unremarkable middle where most species sat, neither courted nor discounted, simply ranked. I should tell you about the range itself, and about the cities we built, because the cities are at the heart of what the human saw and I did not. My testing range was a whole constructed world, and the building of the targets was the work of a large staff of engineers, and the engineers were proud of their work, the way craftspeople are proud, and the targets they were proudest of were the cities. They built them beautifully. That is a strange thing to say about a thing built to be destroyed, but it is true. My engineers built the constructed cities of the highest tier with extraordinary care and detail. Real streets laid out the way real streets are laid out. Homes with rooms, public squares, places of worship, markets, hospitals with wards, schools with the small rooms that small ones learn in. They built them realistic because the test required realism. A species' capacity to unmake a city could only be measured honestly against a real city, and so the cities had to be real in every way except the people. And the engineers, building them, did not think about what they were building, any more than I thought about what I was measuring. They built schools to be destroyed and felt only craft pride in how convincingly they had built them. I walked through those cities before each demonstration, inspecting them, empty cities, perfect and silent, waiting to be unmade, and I never once in 300 years felt the wrongness of an empty school built to be blown apart so that I could measure how fast a species could blow it apart. I felt only satisfaction at the realism. That is what the work had done to me. It had made me able to walk through a perfect empty schoolroom, built solely to be destroyed for a measurement, and feel professional satisfaction. The human walked onto the range and felt, in an afternoon, the thing I had spent 300 years not feeling, and she made me feel it too, finally, and I have never been able to walk through one of those cities since without hearing the children who were never in them. I want to tell you what I knew about humans before that day, because it was very little and most of it was wrong. I knew they were a death-world species, that their homeworld was a hard one, and had shaped them into something physically formidable. I knew they had a reputation, in the parts of the galaxy that bordered human space, for being unexpectedly dangerous in a fight, for fighting in ways the galaxy found difficult to predict. And I knew, from the preliminary data my office had gathered, that humanity possessed a genuinely significant military capacity, more perhaps than their low admission ranks suggested, enough that I had flagged their reassessment as potentially interesting, the rare case where a species might jump several tiers at once. I expected the human demonstration to be impressive. I did not expect it to be the end of my entire understanding of my work, because nothing in 300 years had prepared me for the possibility that the thing I measured was the wrong thing. The human delegation that came to my range was small, and led by a single officer, a woman, and I should tell you about her, because she became the axis on which my whole life turned, though I did not know it when she walked onto the range. Her name was Colonel Vivian Adeyemi, of the human military, and she was not what I expected the representative of a death-world species firepower to be. She was not large, not visibly formidable, not surrounded by the apparatus of destruction I was accustomed to seeing from species eager to impress the Assessor. She was quiet and watchful, and she moved through the preliminary briefings with a kind of careful attention that I read, at the time, as nervousness, the nervousness of an officer about to be tested before the galaxy, and that I understand now was something entirely different. She was not nervous. She was deciding something. She had walked onto my range already weighing a choice, and she spent the briefings watching, measuring not the targets but me, my office, the test itself, the whole apparatus of the ranking. And only at the end did I understand that while I was preparing to assess humanity, Colonel Adeyemi had been assessing us. There was a moment in the first briefing that I have replayed 1,000 times, because it was the human telling me exactly what she was going to do, and I did not hear it. I was explaining the demonstration to her, the tiers, the targets, the scoring, and when I reached the final tier, the constructed city, I described it the way I always described it with professional pride. A fully realized city, built for realism, scored on completeness and speed of destruction. And Colonel Adeyemi listened, and at the end she asked mildly, almost conversationally, "And you've never had a species score it any way other than total destruction?" And I said no, of course not. The metric was destruction. What other way was there to score the unmaking of a city? And she nodded slowly and made a small note and said, "Right, of course. I just wanted to be sure the rules said demonstrate the capacity to destroy it and not destroy it." And I did not understand why she was drawing that distinction, and I confirmed that yes, technically, the rules said demonstrate the capacity, that being the formal language, and she nodded again and thanked me and moved on, and I thought nothing of it. She had just told me, in the first briefing, the exact loophole she was going to walk through to break my entire life's work. I heard it as a procedural clarification. She was reading me my own rules back to me so that later, when she did the impossible thing, no one could say she had broken them. I have never been outmaneuvered so completely, or so gently by anyone. The demonstration was scheduled across 3 days, ascending through the tiers. The first day, the smaller targets, the derelicts, the fortifications and humanity performed on them precisely as I expected, with a competent, efficient, unremarkable destructive capacity that placed them, provisionally, in the respectable middle of the ranking. Colonel Adeyemi destroyed the early targets cleanly and without flourish, and I recorded the numbers, and they were good numbers, unremarkable good numbers, and I began to think that humanity would be exactly what I had predicted, a middling military people taking their middling place. I know now that she was holding back. I did not know it then. That is the thing about being deceived by restraint. It looks exactly like limitation, You cannot tell the difference between a species that cannot do more and a species that is choosing not to, which is itself the entire lesson she came to teach, though I would not understand that for days. On the first day she made humanity look exactly as unremarkable as I expected, and she did it on purpose, demonstrating only enough to place humanity in the forgettable middle, concealing the formidable truth. And she did it, I realized much later, precisely so that the third day would land the way it landed, so that the galaxy would have already filed humanity as middling and unremarkable when she finally showed them what humanity actually was. She set the trap with 2 days of deliberate mediocrity. She let me write down my confident wrong prediction. She let the observers grow bored. She built, with 2 days of careful underperformance, the exact complacency she needed in order to shatter it. The second day, the larger targets, the artificial mountains, the heavy fortifications, and again humanity performed competently, efficiently, well within the range I had predicted, and I recorded the numbers and the picture held. A respectable, unremarkable middle-rank species, demonstrating respectable, unremarkable firepower, exactly as 400 species had before them. I remember at the end of the second day feeling almost disappointed. I had flagged humanity as potentially interesting, and they were turning out to be ordinary, and there is a particular small letdown an assessor feels when a species he hoped would be remarkable proves to be merely adequate. I went to my rest that second night having entirely misjudged what was about to happen to me, my prediction filed, my expectations low, my 300 years of certainty fully intact. It was the last night I would ever spend inside that certainty. I did not know it. I slept well. I always slept well in those years. That was the problem with me, the thing the human was about to fix. I slept well. And then came the third day, and the highest tier, and the final target, the constructed city, the great empty city my engineers built to be unmade, the test that measured the capacity the whole ranking truly rested on, the capacity to destroy a city. And Colonel Vivian Adeyemi walked onto my range, and looked at the city she had been asked to demonstrate her firepower upon, and did the thing that shattered every record I had ever kept. She asked me a question first. That was the beginning of it. Before she fired, before the demonstration's final tier began, she turned to me, the senior assessor, in front of the assembled observers of the Accord, and she asked, quietly, a question no species in 300 years had ever asked on my range. This city, the target. You built it empty, I know that, but you built it as a city, streets, homes, hospitals, schools. You built it to look exactly like a real one so the demonstration would be realistic. She looked at it, the great empty constructed city waiting to be unmade. Why? If it's just a target, why build the schools? Why build it so it looks like a place where people live? What exactly are you measuring, Assessor, when you measure how fast I can unmake a city full of empty schools? I want to tell you what happened inside me in the moment she asked it, because it is the truest thing I can give you and it is not flattering. My first response was not doubt. My first response was the reflexive defensiveness of the expert whose expertise has been questioned by an amateur, a small flare of professional irritation, the thought she does not understand the methodology. I will explain the methodology to her. I actually began, in my mind, to compose the explanation. That the realism of the target was necessary for accurate measurement, that the city had to resemble a real city, so that the destructive capacity demonstrated against it would translate to real military scenarios, that the schools and hospitals were not the point. They were merely components of a realistic urban target, and that her question, while understandable from a layperson, rested on a category error, because we were not measuring the destruction of schools. We were measuring the destruction of a representative city, and the schools were incidental. I had the whole explanation ready. It was a good explanation. It was the explanation I had given myself, without ever quite articulating it, for 300 years. And then, as I prepared to deliver it, I heard it. I actually heard my own explanation for the first time as I assembled it to speak. We are not measuring the destruction of schools, The schools are incidental, and I heard how it sounded, and the explanation died in my throat because I understood in the space of a breath that the schools are incidental was not a defense of my work, it was the indictment of it. The schools were incidental. That was exactly the problem. I had built a measure of military worth in which the schools were incidental, in which a city full of children was scored identically to an empty fortification, in which the only thing that counted was how fast and how completely the whole structure came apart, and whether the structure happened to contain schools or barracks made no difference to the number, and I had called that objectivity. I had called it fairness. I had been proud of the fact that my measure did not distinguish between destroying a fortress and destroying a city full of schools, because not distinguishing was rigor, was consistency, was the elegant indifference of true science. And the human had just shown me that the indifference I was proud of was the precise location of the evil. The schools are incidental. I had spent 300 years building a scoreboard on which the schools were incidental, and I had never once heard how that sounded until a human made me say it to her. I did not have an answer. In 300 years, no one had asked, and I had never asked myself, and I stood on my own range, the foremost measurer of destruction in the galaxy, and I found that I did not know what I was measuring, or rather that I knew exactly what I was measuring and had never once let myself look at it directly. And Colonel Adeyemi watched me not have an answer, and then she said, "That's what I thought," and she turned back to the city, and she began the demonstration that shattered every record. And not one of the records was a record of destruction. She did not refuse to fire. I want to be clear about that, because the easy version of this story has the human nobly declining the test, folding her arms, making a speech about how she would not participate in measuring destruction. That is not what happened, and what actually happened was stranger and far more devastating, because she did the demonstration. She completed it fully, by the rules, and in completing it by the rules she broke them so completely that my office never recovered. Here is what the rules of the final tier were precisely, because the precision is the whole of it. The species being assessed was given the constructed city as a target and a fixed window of time, and was scored on the completeness and speed of the city's destruction. That was the metric. Unmake the city, as fully and as fast as possible. 300 years of species had walked onto my range and done exactly that, brought their greatest weapons to bear and unmade the city as fully and as fast as they could, and I had measured the unmaking, and the best of them, the highest ranked, were the ones who left the least standing in the least time. That was the record. Most complete destruction, fastest. Colonel Adeyemi looked at that metric, destroy the city as fully and as fast as possible, and she found the thing inside it that no one in 300 years had found, which was that the metric did not actually say destroy the city. It said demonstrate the capacity to destroy the city. And those are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the entire distance between what the galaxy measured and what the galaxy should have measured, and Colonel Adeyemi had seen that distance in the briefings, while I thought she was nervous, and she had decided to walk through it. What she did was this. She brought human firepower to bear on the constructed city, real firepower, the genuine destructive capacity of her species, and it was considerable, more than considerable. I saw in those first moments that humanity's true firepower was far above the middle rank I had provisionally assigned them, that they had been deliberately underperforming the first 2 days, holding back, demonstrating only the unremarkable middle while concealing the formidable truth. The humans were strong. That was real. The first thing she demonstrated in the opening seconds of the final tier was that humanity could in fact unmake the city as fully and as fast as any species I had ever tested, perhaps faster, perhaps more completely. She established that. She made it unmistakable, in a single overwhelming opening salvo that scoured a measured section of the city to nothing, and registered on my instruments as among the highest destructive readings I had recorded in 3 centuries. And then she stopped. She stopped, with the city mostly still standing, with the clock still running, with the destruction she had just proven she was capable of hanging unfinished in the air. And she did the thing that broke my office, which was that she spent the rest of the demonstration window not destroying the city but taking it apart. Precisely. Surgically. She used human firepower, the same firepower that had just scoured a section to nothing, to disassemble the constructed city with a control I had never seen, never imagined, never thought to measure. She dropped the fortifications without touching the homes. She collapsed the military structures and left the hospitals standing. She cut the city's defenses away from its dwellings with a precision that my instruments, designed only to measure destruction, did not even have the categories to record. I had to invent the readings as I watched, because nothing in 300 years of assessment had a column for asterisk force applied this exactly. She took a city she had just proven she could erase, and she unbuilt only the parts of it that, in a real war, would have been the threat, and she left standing, untouched, undamaged, every part of it that, in a real war, would have been the people. And then, with seconds left in the window, she did the last thing, the thing that is the actual record she shattered, the thing the observers of the accord rose from their seats to witness and did not understand. The constructed city had been built with a feature my engineers always included, a realistic detail, a shelter system, the deep protected places a real city builds for its people in case of attack. Empty, of course. The city was empty, but built because realism required it. And Colonel Adeyemi, in the final seconds, turned the full measured force of human firepower onto the approaches to those shelters. Not to destroy them, but to seal them, to collapse the ways into them in a precise protective pattern, the way you would do it if there were people inside that you were trying to keep safe from the very bombardment you yourself were conducting, burying the shelters under exactly enough rubble to protect them and not one fragment more, so that if the city had been full, if those empty schools and homes and hospitals had held the people they were built to look like they held, every one of those people would have been alive, sealed safe beneath a city whose threats had been surgically removed around them. Then the window closed and the demonstration ended, and Colonel Vivian Adeyemi turned to me, the senior assessor, and to the assembled observers of the Galactic Accord, and the silence on my range was the largest silence I have ever stood inside. "You asked for a demonstration of human firepower," she said. "There it is. That's all of it. You saw the opening, you saw what we can do. We can erase a city as fast as anyone you've ever tested, and you can put that in your ranking. But that was the first 10 seconds, and the first 10 seconds is the only part your test knows how to measure, and I need the Accord to understand what it just watched in the other part, the part your instruments don't have a column for. Anyone can destroy a city. You've got 400 species in your records who can destroy a city. Destroying a city is easy. It's the easiest thing there is. You just point everything you have at it and stop caring. That's not firepower. That's just force with the aiming switched off. What you just watched, taking a city apart and leaving the people alive, applying exactly enough force and not one bit more, sealing the shelters instead of the graves, that's firepower. That's what the word should mean. The power isn't in how much you can destroy. Any fool with a big enough weapon can destroy. The power is in how precisely you can choose what not to. And we just set a record on that in front of all of you, except you don't have the record, because you never thought to keep it, because you've spent 300 years measuring the wrong thing. And I, Orontes Reddy, senior assessor of the Office of Comparative Armament, stood on my own range and understood, all at once, with a vertigo I have never fully recovered from, that she was right. That for 300 years I had ranked the peoples of the galaxy by the one measure that was actually the easiest to achieve and the least worth having, the capacity for destruction, which any sufficiently armed fool possesses, and had never once measured the thing that was actually rare, actually difficult, actually worth ranking a species by, which was the capacity for restraint, the capacity to hold overwhelming force and apply it with precision, to choose, under all the pressure of war, exactly what not to destroy. I had built my whole life's work on a scoreboard that rewarded the wrong thing, and a human officer had walked onto my range, and by completing my test exactly as written, shown the entire accord that the test had been measuring the cheapest quality a species can have, and calling it the most important. The accord did not know what to do with what it had seen. That is the honest truth of the aftermath, and it is more interesting than the triumphant version, so I will give you the honest one. There was no immediate revolution. A human officer had just demonstrated to the assembled observers of 60,000 worlds that the entire basis of the galactic ranking was a measure of the wrong thing, and the Accord's first response was not to reform itself, but to be confused, and then to be defensive, and then to try, in the way institutions always try, to absorb the disruption back into the existing system without actually changing anything. The first official response to Colonel Adeyemi's demonstration was an administrative one. My office did not know how to score it. We had no column for what she had done. And so the initial ruling, I am ashamed of this, though it was not mine, it came from above me. The initial ruling was to score humanity on the part of the demonstration that the test could measure, the opening salvo, the 10 seconds of destruction, and to rank them on that, high, very high, because the opening salvo had been genuinely formidable. The Accord's first instinct was to take the human demonstration of restraint and simply ignore it, score the destruction, and file humanity as a high firepower species, as though the rest of it had not happened. Colonel Adeyemi rejected the ranking. That was the next move, and it was the move that finally forced the change. She formally declined the high firepower rank the Accord offered, in a statement that became, in time, one of the founding documents of what the Accord eventually became. She said that humanity would not accept a place in the ranking that was based on its capacity to destroy, because to accept such a place was to agree that destruction was the thing worth ranking, and humanity did not agree, and would not lend its name to the agreement. She said that if the Accord wished to rank humanity, it would have to rank what humanity had actually demonstrated, which was precision, restraint, the capacity to choose what not to destroy, and that if the Accord had no column for that, then the Accord's whole instrument was broken, and humanity would wait, at whatever low rank the broken instrument assigned them, until the instrument was fixed. They chose, deliberately, to be ranked low by the old measure rather than high, because being ranked high by the old measure meant endorsing the old measure, and they would not. I have thought many times about how strange and how powerful that refusal was. Humanity had the firepower to rank near the top. They had proven it in the opening salvo. And they declined to be ranked on it, declined the deference, the courtship, the weight in the councils that a high rank would have bought them, because the rank was based on a measure they had come specifically to discredit. They paid, in real galactic standing, for the right to make their point. They accepted a low place in the ranking, and all the discounting that came with it, rather than accept a high place that would have validated the thing they had come to break. It was the most expensive demonstration I have ever witnessed, and they made it on purpose, and they made it not to elevate themselves but to change what the galaxy measured. And slowly, far too slowly over years, against all the inertia of an ancient institution, it worked. Not because of any single dramatic moment. The dramatic moment had already happened on my range, and dramatic moments do not change institutions, only the slow pressure that follows them does. What changed the Accord was that the question Colonel Adeyemi had asked could not be unasked. What exactly are you measuring when you measure how fast I can unmake a city full of empty schools? Once that question had been spoken on the Assessor's range, in front of the observers of 60,000 worlds, it spread, the way a true question spreads, and species after species began to ask it of the ranking and of themselves, and the old measure destruction scale, the capacity to unmake, began, under the weight of the question, to look like exactly what it was, which was a measure of the cheapest and most dangerous quality a species could have. Dressed up for 300 years as the most important. The ranking was reformed. It took the better part of my remaining life, and I spent that life on it, because after the human demonstration I could not do my old work anymore, could not go back to measuring destruction and calling it firepower, could not rank peoples by the ease with which they could erase a city. I led the reform myself in the end, the old assessor unmaking his own life's work, because someone had to and because I was the one who best understood how wrong it had been, having spent 300 years being wrong with total precision. We built a new assessment. It was harder. Restraint is much harder to measure than destruction. You cannot simply count what is gone. You have to evaluate what was chosen, what was spared, how exactly force was applied. But we built it slowly, and the new ranking measured not how much a species could destroy but how precisely it could choose not to. And under the new ranking the whole galaxy looked different, because the species that had ranked highest under the old measure, the great destroyers, were not the same as the species that ranked highest under the new one, and the galaxy began, slowly, to defer to a different kind of power, and to court a different kind of strength, and to listen most closely not to those who could hurt it most, but to those who could hold the most force with the most precision and choose, under pressure, what to spare. I met Colonel Adeyemi once more, years later, when the reform was well underway and I was very old. I asked her the question I had carried since the range. I asked her whether she had known, walking onto my range, that she was going to do it, whether the demonstration of restraint had been planned, or whether she had decided it in the moment, watching the empty city with its empty schools. And she told me that she had decided it in the briefings, the days I thought she was nervous, watching the test and understanding what it measured. And she told me why, and her answer is the thing I have built the rest of my life around. She said, "Where I come from, we learn the hard way what happens to a people who get good at destruction and call it strength. We did it to ourselves for a long time before we came out here. We ranked ourselves the way your accord ranks everyone by how much we could destroy, and we got very, very good at it, good enough to nearly end ourselves. And the lesson we took out of almost ending ourselves was the only lesson worth taking, which is that the capacity to destroy is not strength. It's just capacity, and that the actual strength, the thing that's rare, the thing that's hard, the thing worth building a civilization on, is the discipline to hold that capacity and not use it. Or to use it so precisely that you only ever take the threat and never the person. We almost died learning that. And then we came out here and found a whole galaxy that hadn't learned it yet, that was still ranking itself by the thing that almost killed us, still calling destruction strength, still building scoreboards that rewarded the exact quality we'd nearly ended ourselves cultivating. And I thought somebody has to walk onto that range and show them. Not tell them. Telling them wouldn't work. They'd have a rebuttal. Show them. Complete their test in a way that makes the test impossible to keep believing in. So I did, that's all it was. I broke your records because your records were measuring the thing that kills civilizations, and I wanted the galaxy to start measuring the thing that saves them, before it learned the way we learned, which is almost too late. I am very old now, the last of the assessors who served under the old ranking, and I have outlived my own life's work twice over, once when I built it, and once when I unbuilt it, and the unbuilding was the better work, though it cost me the comfort of the certainty I had spent 3 centuries accumulating. I do not regret the cost. A human officer walked onto my range and asked me what I was measuring, and I did not have an answer, and the not having an answer was the beginning of the only wisdom I ever earned. The official report of that day says that humanity demonstrated significant firepower and was assessed accordingly. It is accurate. It says nothing true. What actually happened on my range was that a human officer was asked to demonstrate how much she could destroy, and instead she demonstrated how precisely she could choose not to. And in doing so, She broke not my records but my whole understanding of what a record was for, and started the slow work of teaching a galaxy of 60,000 worlds that the question was never how much can you destroy. The question was always how much can you spare. And that the second question is the only one that has ever told you anything worth knowing about a people. The Galactic Council requested a demonstration of human firepower. And one human officer gave them exactly that, the truest demonstration of firepower the galaxy had ever seen, by showing them that the word had never meant what they thought it meant, and that the most powerful thing a people can do with a weapon is to hold it, fully capable, fully armed, fully able to destroy everything in front of them, and choose, with perfect precision, to take only the threat and leave the child alive in the shelter beneath the city. She shattered every record. She just shattered them in the one category the galaxy had never had the wisdom to keep, and then she made us keep it. That is the only record that was ever worth shattering. I spent 300 years not knowing that. She taught it to me in an afternoon, on a range built for destruction, by declining with overwhelming and perfectly disciplined power to destroy.